Yeah, Jen, you might remember this. We had a student whose dad was doing a campaign, political campaign.
Yes.
Well, he was telling me about like this photo shoot they did to, I don't know, whatever, advertise. And he's like, yeah, they had us go walk on this dock or something with fishing poles, and I've never been fishing with my dad in my life. And it was just really strange to think that's what they wanted to show. That's how these two men, or father-son, bonded together. It had to be fishing.
So what we're going to be talking about today is Christian masculinity. We are Red Weather Christians.
I'm Steve.
And I'm Jen. So on today's episode, we really want everyone to come away with the idea that we should rethink what we've been taught in the church about what it means to be a man and what Christian masculinity needs to look like.
And if nothing more than that, just start a conversation.
Yeah. And speaking of starting a conversation, I think what got us talking about this, thinking about this, was that we read a book called Jesus and John Wayne by Kristin Du Mez. Great book. So we both really enjoyed the book. I rated it a 5 on Goodreads. I thought it gave me a really good idea of the history of Christianity when it comes to masculinity in the church. And it kind of all led up to how Christians voted for our past president. And so it was really interesting to see that progress and how not only did they vote for him because he was a Republican, but because they really believed that he was doing the right things and doing good things. So the book helped me understand what these voters were thinking.
Yeah. And for me, I rated it 4 stars because I think she used a lot of valid points, but intentionally left out maybe some better sides to Christian masculinity so that the point could be further hammered home.
Well, I do remember, and this is something that you have mentioned to me, and I remember reading it as well, she talks a lot about how fragile the male ego is. And I think we both thought that was kind of funny, but I mean, you're the man here, so maybe you want to comment on that.
Right. I took offense to that. Because of my fragile ego, I didn't like her calling out my fragile
exactly.
ego. Right. You know, I just thought that was probably not accurate.
I mean, maybe a generalization.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are plenty of men out there with fragile egos. I will say my husband is not one of them. So what is Christian masculinity? We should probably start there.
Obviously, some weird parts about this, if you're a secular listener, is that we have to define this at all separate from masculinity. Why is this something different?
Yeah, and I think it really is something different now because you think of the term masculinity and gosh, I think the definition has really evolved through the centuries and especially in the last few decades, I would say, to incorporate a lot more in its definition of what it means to be masculine. Right. I mean, if you asked Tan from Queer Eye, what does it mean to be masculine? His definition is going to be quite different than if you ask a Southern Baptist preacher, I bet.
Well, and that brings in a different aspect to this, that if we talk about Christian masculinity, we actually say this is what a Christian man should be. And if anything's outside of that, they're not a true Christian man. This is commonly referred to as the no true Scotsman fallacy, where you just exclude any counterexamples as being even possible options.
So do you want to give us an example of a Christian man versus a true Christian man?
Well, a very easy one to bring up would be heterosexuality, that a Christian man follows God, is male, etc. But if they happen to do anything other than heterosexual activities,
they are not a true Christian man. Is that what you're saying?
That's like the easiest one to throw out there.
Right. Not what we believe, but probably what a lot of Christians believe, I would guess. And there are a lot of things. I mean, I think a lot of subtle, that's not the right word, but maybe a lot of other little things that is dependent more upon maybe where you live too. So if you're down in, I don't know, maybe like Texas or something, maybe carrying guns is a bigger deal there or something like that. And maybe that is part of how you are masculine as a man. And I think that would translate right into the church. I mean, we knew a guy in our church who always talked about carrying his gun to church services.
Right. Concealed carry permit. You got to have it. Never know what's going to happen.
Yikes.
True Christian man. And yet, we have historically seen that those true Christian men are very much fallible in those purity examples.
I just think it's a dangerous trap for anyone when you start, you have this noun as your identity, and then you throw an adjective in front of it, and it just complicates everything. So you're a Christian, but you're not a true Christian unless, and it's just this whole mess. And I think, reading Jesus's words, it's not super complicated. And it doesn't include a lot of the, you have to carry a gun and ride a horse and...
The warrior mentality. The hero mentality.
Yeah, warrior, hero, coming in, saving the day, protecting the women and children, and being the leader under pressure and all that stuff.
In fact, he says the opposite of that. If you were to look at what is often quoted from his Sermon on the Mount, which lots of different religions and non-religious people like, it's antithetical to what we believe or what we've been taught about Christian masculinity.
Yeah, so to recap the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, basically it's saying, blessed are the following people: the poor, those who mourn, the meek, those hungry for justice, the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, the persecuted. The only one of those that I can maybe even see as being what people might think as masculine is the hungry for justice one. But then I also like to think, well, in my perspective, hungry for justice could mean justice for maybe poor people or immigrants or those kinds of situations, not like defending our great country from, dirty Mexicans or something.
Yeah, and that was actually, a campaign speech. So kind of weird.
Yeah, that's another reason why I wanted to read the book, because I wanted to understand how people could justify those contradictions. I did not understand. And it's deep rooted. It's not like it just happened overnight. This has been happening for decades. Men have been raised in the church that is thinking certain things about what it means to be a man. And this episode is just to maybe get us to think maybe some of those things were wrong.
Well, let's talk about a couple of those. One, we were talking about Christian masculinity principles that revolved heavily around marriage. That is, you are a man if you protect a woman.
Yeah, but then what does the man do who doesn't want to get married or doesn't find anyone that he is in love with or something like that? What does he do? It scares me a little bit because now I'm like, oh my gosh, they're probably going to have to compensate, right? Because they don't have that identity, that part of it. So they're going to compensate in other ways, and compensation, that makes me nervous.
Anyway, the other aspect to that would be if your Christian masculinity is rooted in your marriage, which then is defined by, oh, I'm the head of the household. I have dominion over you, wife.
Icky.
That's where we have another problem. They don't necessarily have dominion if they're not married, but then if they do get married, that's also bad.
Yeah, it's bad because you go into a marriage and there's a lot that is talked about as far as being a partner and everything. But in Christian marriages, it's not really a partnership. They'll say that it is, but it's not really, because the man is the head of the household. He's the leader. All decisions go through him. All decisions go through the man. And even if like the wife and the husband are arguing about something and they both bring up great points, and let's say that they're tied in the argument,
tiebreaker goes with the man.
It defaults to the man. So that doesn't feel like a partnership to me. That feels like one of them is the boss and one of them is the underling. And personally, I don't like to be an underling. And in Steve's and my marriage, I do feel like it is more of a partnership. And I'm really thankful for that because when I grew up in the Christian church, as did Steve. We were taught whatever we were taught about what a marriage looks like. And I'm glad that we kind of grew together. We got married young, probably at a time when we did believe a little bit more of the whole man as the head of the household. So I don't really know what happened to us, but we turned out all right, and I'm really thankful.
Yeah, we can look at a lot of different things, but one thing that I've said, more now than then, of course, was that if I were to meet 22-year-old Jen again prior to getting married, I'd be like, maybe we're not supposed to be together. Because 40-year-old Steve is in a lot of different places, and so is 40-year-old Jen.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I'd be like, this guy is too conservative for me. No, thank you. So we both kind of were at a much more conservative place in our lives when we got married. And somehow, I don't know, we grew up together. We had a lot of conversations. I was never a particularly submissive person, even when I was more conservative. So maybe that was part of it. I realized I'm not going to do that.
And so if people ask us, man, Steve, Jen, how is your marriage so awesome? Because it is.
Yes.
Parts of us, we don't have a good explanation because it's just what we expected to do. Like, we came in with expectations that it wasn't going to be all about us, that we weren't going to change the other person drastically, and that we were going to have to work through things. And because we had this underlying commitment, that we had to figure it out. We didn't have an option.
Yeah, well, we trusted each other too. I think that's a big part of the pie. When you get married and you compromise and you have arguments and you get through them and you grow together is trust at the foundation. Because, I don't know, if you had been off cheating or whatever and then we're trying to have a marriage, no, it's not happening.
Yeah, those are bad things.
Speaking of cheating, though, quick aside, it does relate. We were listening to this podcast years ago called The Faith Angle, and one of the episodes was about how when it was a particular anecdote about this woman who had been physically abused by her husband, and the church was trying to tell her, well, we got him to apologize to you, so you need to stay in the marriage. And she was trying to say, no, I can't stay in this marriage. I have endured enough. He is abusive. He's done it repeatedly. I'm not staying in the marriage. And she was the one shunned from the church. I just feel like there are definitely different standards towards women and men coming from the church, and that is not okay. My goodness, they should have been on her side, if anything. And I don't know, I feel like men are forgiven more easily in the church than women. And that's just kind of my personal experience and things that I've read and things that I've heard. So it's not like I'm throwing out facts, but that's what seems to be the case.
Well, I mean, in Kristin Du Mez's book, she gives more of those cases where pastors, with whether it's infidelity or other inappropriate behavior, have been taken down from their pedestals and yet returned to a pedestal somewhere else.
Oh, yeah, Mark Driscoll. I mean, The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, it's a great podcast, but it's basically, in a nutshell, talking about how much of a douchebag Mark Driscoll is, but here he is, preaching still, right now. He is the preacher of a church. After all this awful stuff came to light about how he's basically emotionally abusive, among other things, hyper-masculine, totally homophobic, I mean, a ton of things. He's still preaching. Seems like he's doing fine. I mean, listen, I think forgiveness is an important element in life, but just because you ask for forgiveness isn't just like a free get-out-of-jail card. That's what I have trouble with.
Yeah, so let's return to some basics of Christian masculinity that we were either raised with or that we've heard or that come through even today, which is the rugged outdoorsman. That's masculine.
Oh, yeah. Hunting, fishing, just being in the wilderness, camping.
Any role in the military, that's masculine.
Definitely. Yes, I just stuck my tongue out.
And then, of course, you have the Liam Neeson father from Taken, which is also very masculine.
I have to tell you, when I saw that movie, I liked it so. I loved that movie. I was like, oh my gosh, he's the best dad ever. And like everybody I talked to loved the movie too. He was great.
And yet, there are problems when we put that as the standard of masculinity. Not all of us can be Liam Neeson from Taken.
Here is just a quick aside from Jen. That's me. I just feel like the whole like being a protector thing or whatever. If Steve, my husband, was in some kind of danger and there was like I was around and I
would never be in danger.
Because you're a man. And I was around and I had the opportunity to step in and do something, you better believe I'm going to go up and start throwing punches, slapping, whatever I need to do. It's going to get done. Knee to the groin. I'll bring back my junior high self-defense moves. Better believe it. But yeah, I mean, does that make me less feminine? I don't know, maybe.
Well, we would just give you credit as being mama bear. Like, we don't discredit any mama bear.
Yeah, but if I'm like stepping in for my husband, like, oh man, you're going to be so embarrassed. I'm going to lose my femininity.
Right. I don't even know how we would have sex then.
No, we wouldn't be able to. Our marriage would probably crumble.
Because I would no longer be a man. You would no longer be a woman. Just wouldn't even work.
Destruction of the fragile ego.
Yeah. So these are these common threads. And so I think of different things, different times in our life when we've had the opportunity to go on different, the gender specific retreat.
Oh boy, what a treat. Yeah, Steve's retreats are like shooting guns and grilling and eating lots of meat and shooting pool. And my retreats are like casseroles and salads, nature walk, a prayer walk in the morning, and like some kind of craft. One year it was making a decorative tissue box cover.
Yeah, so there are roles here that we get ingrained in us, and obviously the retreats include, men or boys of all ages, and so they see this is how you behave as a man. And we also had a really interesting situation come up. We worked at a Christian camp out in California one summer, and one guy was kind of
yeah, there was something just like not quite right about him. He rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't yuck.
Anyway, he was dismissed from his position at camp for basically being a huge misogynist.
Yeah.
And they just didn't want to tolerate that anymore. I got an invitation from him later in the summer to go to a man camp with him.
What in the world is a man camp? So this was a Christian kind of thing?
Oh yeah, definitely Christian. Definitely invited me. He definitely did not invite the other male friend that I had from camp, and I made fun of him because he wasn't man enough to go to the man camp with me.
In your face!
But that's just some weird stuff that happens, and yet still exists.
It does still exist. And the Promise Keepers thing, which if you are a Christian and you might have heard of it, it was kind of like a disruption to that a little bit because men would come together at this giant, what do you even call it? Like a...
They're stadiums.
No, not that stadium. Like, what was it called? Like
just a conference.
A conference. There's the word. So it was this giant conference in a giant stadium full of men, and they would be like getting a little emotional and crying and like processing through some stuff. And so there were a lot of Christians who were like, oh, we don't like this. And there were also issues with Promise Keepers too. But anyway, I don't really think it's a thing anymore.
I wouldn't know. I didn't go to it. I was just a little too young when it was really big. But it obviously happened. It was a fad. It was a Christian masculinity fad. And I think fads in general, as they come and go like that, should not be what you base your life on or your gender or identity at all.
Right. And I mean, I think that's something that our entire season 2 is going to try to touch on is like fads and trends that, come up or have been around. And we just want to take a more critical look at them. Just like how we've changed so much since we were 22 years old in our Christian faith. And we think that that's a healthy thing because we've been having conversations and maybe even some arguments about what it means to be a Christian. And we think that's good. And so that's kind of the message that we want to get out there. Like, have the conversations, people. Don't just accept things.
Right. So obviously what everyone wants to know is, Jen.
Yes, Steve.
Am I man enough for you?
Oh, my. Yeah, that's such a weird question. Yes, you're a man. Yes, I like you. I love you, even. But and yes, we get the benefits of I'm a woman, you're a man. But my question is, like, are you a good human? Are you a good person? Can we have fun together?
What I want to know, my fragile ego needs to know, am I masculine enough for you?
Sure, why not?
And that's the thing.
I don't even care.
I don't need Jen to answer this question for me. Like, she likes me for who I am, and that's fine.
I mean, I guess, okay. I like that you play sports and that you are physically fit. Is that a masculine? Because I feel like the same thing could be said to a woman. I like that you are intelligent. That could definitely be said to a woman.
Therein lies the problem. That the qualities that we like about humans can be universal. And it isn't dictated by some weird Christian masculinity principles.
Well, I think because in the Bible, it talks about head of household a lot.
Patriarchy.
Yeah, biblical patriarchy. I think that men have really latched onto that. And even though I believe through my own research and reading a book called The Making of Biblical Womanhood, that a lot of these verses that are used to support biblical patriarchy could very well have been interpreted incorrectly and translated incorrectly from the original text. So I don't put so much stock into the head of household thing, but that is definitely taught in, I would say, the majority of Christian churches out there, that the man is the head of the house.
And that without the man, so like single mother homes, oh man, those kids need that man to show them what's good and right, like a father, like God the Father.
Oh, which is a whole other issue too, as far as God being a gender and that he has to be male. I grew up believing that God was a gender and that he was male. It's he in the Bible. It's always he. And the translations that I was reading growing up, which was predominantly the NIV version. And so I just always assumed, and it's those kinds of things that you grow up, you don't realize that these are just in your brain until you have a conversation. You're like, oh yeah, I never even questioned that. I just always said he when I talk about God. And I still do, because I think it's just been ingrained in me.
And obviously, I always like to point out that he could be a gender. We don't know.
Right.
But we don't have to put a gender on him.
Her, them, it.
Right.
Yeah. It is funny, though. I was reading in Jesus and John Wayne, and Kristin Du Mez brings up this other book called The Total Woman by Maribel Morgan, written in somewhere in the 70s. And oh my goodness, this book, I will never read it unless I guess I get a used copy for free. I will never pay money for this book. But good old Maribel, wouldn't I like to sit down and have a little chat with her, maybe a cup of coffee? She says that the biblical remedy for marital conflict was the submission of wives to husbands, but she goes so far as to say that basically it is the woman's responsibility entirely to keep the man happy. It's the woman's responsibility for the husband not to cheat, because if the husband cheats, that means the wife, was not sexually available enough to him. She talks about how every evening when your husband gets home from work, because, if you're a woman, you're home and your husband is out working. So every evening when he gets home, to maybe try putting on a different sexy costume for him. So when you open the door, he sees you in a cute, sexy gypsy costume and you just immediately go have sex. And she also mentions that you should be having sex, not just having sex, but initiating, being a seductress 7 days a week.
Yeah, but while that would be great and all, there are some issues because we will discuss this more when we discuss Christian femininity, but most girls are raised under standards of purity.
Right. So it's so confusing. Oh my gosh, that's such a good point because it is all about staying pure. Purity rings, purity cards. You had one in your wallet, didn't you?
Probably.
Yeah, I didn't ever have a purity ring.
Who was more pure? True Christian over here.
I'm a heathen Christian. Yeah, so we are taught to abstain from everything. I mean, there was a book out called I Kiss Dating Goodbye where like Christian girls were getting on this bandwagon of like, I'm not even going to kiss you until we're at the altar at our wedding. I, at the time, thought that was the dumbest thing, but a lot of people were really resonating with that. And so then you get into a marriage and then you're supposed to turn into this seductress who knows how to do all this stuff. And like, what? Basically, like, I don't know, kind of like a porn star, but you better not be watching any of that garbage.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, Steve and I maybe started our marriage kind of thinking like head of household. I don't know. Like, I think it was just there in our brains, but it was certainly never something that we sat down and talked about. Like, I understand, Steve, that you are the head of household. You know, I understand that the decisions are ultimately up to you. It just never was like that for us. And so I think just naturally we veered away from that and we've had a wonderful, great, healthy marriage. So in your face, Christian people who believe in head of household.
Sure. But about our marriage, we do have defined roles and they might seem to be gender stereotypical. For instance, Jen told me that I need to take out the trash. That was my first encounter with not being the head of the household.
Yeah, because I told him I was not doing that.
So then I decided to spin it like I was protecting her from something because I was taking out the trash. I didn't want her female body having to do that.
Right. I mean, who could be lurking out on that dark street on the curb where I had to drop the trash if I had to do it?
Right. So I'm the protector. And I made that decision for you to tell me that decision.
Thank you, husband.
Right. And of course, some of that's hyperbole. We do talk about different things that we would do or we expect, and we share roles.
Yeah, and it's in flux. So for example, the other night, Steve came home and he asked, were there any dinner plans? He didn't say, what are the dinner plans? He said, do you have dinner plans? And I said, no. And so he made tuna sandwiches.
It's real tough. I took it upon myself. I should deserve a pat on the back because I went out of my natural role.
And I should just be effusive in my gratitude to you for doing that, making the dinner for the family. But typically I would say I'm more in charge of meals because Steve is working full time right now. And I'm more of in the stay-at-home mom role, though I also do write and a couple other things. But that night, I didn't want to make dinner, and I had been dealing with some stuff that, my family out in California is going through. So I wasn't at a place where I wanted to even think about dinner. And so Steve just stepped in and he did that. And so the roles, I think it's okay to have them-ish, and then just a lot of flux and compromise and...
Yeah.
And I don't think you were bitter about having to make dinner. I don't think you were up there oh, I can't believe Jen didn't make dinner. This is not my job. I shouldn't have to be doing this right now. And she better say thank you to me later in bed.
I might have thought the last thing, but for totally different reasons.
Oh, boy.
Anyway, even if we didn't touch on all the aspects of Christian masculinity, what we want is for the conversation to happen, for us to rethink it, and not to be stuck in one avenue of these are the examples, or this is what it means to be a true Christian man. We want that to be open. For instance, one last story is that if you didn't know it, Jen and I met in musical theater on the stage. Typically, we might look at males involved in musical theater or choir as be lesser males.
Not as masculine.
Right. For mostly the bad in that case. That's an overgeneralization. Met plenty of great men in that realm, and there's no reason they couldn't also be great Christian men.
Right. Masculine doesn't really need to be part of the equation, I don't think. I think it really comes down to, are you a good human? Are you doing good things? Are you loving others? Are you a trustworthy person? You know, and then going back to what Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount. It was a beautiful set of statements that he made. And speaking of that, quick book recommendation. So Steve and I went to a retreat, which was actually really good. It was a Christian retreat and it was really good. And our speakers, their names were Mark and Lisa Scandrette. Well, anyway, we got this book that Mark had written called The Ninefold Path of Jesus, Hidden Wisdom of the Beatitudes. And it's a really great book. Each chapter is one of the Beatitudes and how to apply it in your life. It's simple, it's short, it's a small book, it's really lovely. And Mark and Lisa are awesome people. We got to talk with them. They are fantastic. They are Christians, which, I mean, we've had some maybe not as good experiences with Christian speakers at retreats or conferences. So it was a really refreshing surprise to us that Mark and Lisa were so great.
I mean, to put it bluntly, sometimes we go in with pretty low expectations.
Well, we had come off of the last kind of Christian event that we'd been to. The speaker was pretty abysmal. So that had been our experience leading up.
But in fairness to him, he was probably a true Christian male.
There we go. And there you have it. Are you a Christian man or are you a true Christian man? That is the question.
So that's it for today.
Thank you guys for listening. We appreciate you. We hope that this has given you a little bit to think about and maybe have some conversations with some people in your lives.
We are Red Weather Christians.
I'm Jen.
I'm Steve.
If you're enjoying Red Weather Christians, we would really appreciate it if you would share our podcast on social media or give us a rating on Apple Podcasts. Don't ask me why, but there's some kind of magical element to Apple Podcasts where people are able to see our podcast a little easier with more reviews and ratings. So we really appreciate those who have already done that, and keep it coming. Ultimately, we just want to reach people and we want more conversations to be had because Steve and I believe in Christianity. We do. We think it can be really great and a whole lot better than it is now.
Mic drop.